Hi, my name is Daniel, and today I'll be reviewing The Weight of Our Sky, which is a realistic fiction novel written by Hanna Alkaf. Okay, so The Weight of Our Sky. It's a book by Hanna Alkaf, and it's a realistic fiction. It's based in Malaysia and based on real events that happened in there because of racial tensions between the Chinese and the Malays. This causes a lot of problems, and it focuses on our protagonist, whose name is Melati. Melati is a strange girl because she has a dien in her head. What that means is basically she has sort of a mental illness in a way that keeps making her see gruesome death scenes of her mom and making her think horrible thoughts and really pessimistic events that could occur possibly. This leads to her eventually developing kind of a soothing ritual, a type of superstitious belief. So because of this, she likes to tap in threes, she taps her head, she taps her feet, she thinks in threes, she counts in threes, and she does all of this to make the DM in her head happy so that the DM promises not to make her suffer even more. Now, one day while she's going to just to watch a movie, the racial tensions between the Chinese and the Malays finally crack to a point where riots start to happen. A lot of people are starting to be shops are getting destroyed, they're getting burned, they're being looted, people are dying, and both sides detest each other so much there's been just random killings of both sides. This leads to her eventually having to reconsider what she really cares about, how much she really cares about her stuff, and she has to deal with her Dien and his extremely annoying visions all along the way. For emotional variation, sometimes I feel like it's decent. Sometimes it just doesn't go on for a long time because The Weight of Our Sky focuses on a very negative tone because of the racial tensions, all the death, the destruction, and Melati's own Dien in her head. It makes it kind of difficult to have extremely lighthearted moments. Melati, our protagonist, does have light moments, happy moments, but they only happen when she's the one making a plan, when she's helping someone else, which happens very often in this book. And eventually this allows her to overpower her Dien mostly and, gain control of her life more. So yes, there is emotional variation. Yes, it focuses mainly on her own benefiting other people, but I will say that most of the book was extremely negative and it relies mainly on tension and action to keep you wanting to read. Her character, Melati's character, develops quite a bit in the book because she starts off and is extremely pessimistic with 100% of the Dien just controlling her brain. She is under its will basically, and she has to constantly do her tapping rituals and threes or just counting books on a shelf even to keep the Dien in check and to please it. Overall, she starts to develop more and more self-worth through the book by completing, better heroic deeds to other people, by helping other people. And eventually she gets to a point where she helps herself get rid of the Dien better than ever before. And she doesn't have to keep relying on her rituals. Other characters like Vincent here, they have some development, but they're generally pretty static. And Melati's the real one that is really dynamic in the entire book. Okay, for ideas, topics, and themes in The Weight of Our Sky, I think it focuses really on two parts. The first one is definitely self-worth because we focus on, Melati's life, Melati's mind. Her Dien constantly makes her think that she's not worthy, she's terrible, she's evil, and that she's going to eventually cause her own mother's death if she doesn't if she stops tapping her triple rituals and doing all the crap she does to quote unquote please the Dien. The Dien is honestly a figurative representation of her own lack of self-worth, of the fact that she really has kind of a mental illness that causes her to no longer be able to think, the more positive, the more optimistic parts of the world. Half of this book is devoted to learning about her journey to overcoming the horrible negative influence of the Dien in her mind, and eventually her realization of how great of a person she actually is and how much self-worth she really does have. Now, the other theme is based mainly on racism and discrimination, and that's unity. There were many characters introduced throughout the book that were kind of made to make this feel like a huge thing. For example, Vincent right here, his mom is named Auntie B, and his mom is Chinese. He's Chinese too. But our main character Melati is Malaysian. Literally, the entirety of this book is centered around the fact that, you know, the Malays and the Chinese are going against each other in this racial bigotry war. Her receiving help and aid and actually having her life saved multiple times by this Chinese family goes to show how unity works. She later helps another member of their family finally realize that this racism is getting out of hand and that only helping each other and holding up together the weight of their sky is the only way to really solve the crisis that's happening right here. So yeah, for ideas, topics, themes, I think it mainly just centers on self-worth and how unity helps you hold up the weight of our sky. Now let's move on to written quality. I think the written quality and the weight of our sky was great, especially with the Dian getting his own voice through the italics. It makes it really interesting to see Melati kind of communicating with her own head in many parts of the book. Most of it felt, in my opinion, really smooth. It didn't have a lot of really jarring bumps. There were a few, I think, side plots that were unnecessary, and I felt like they could have been focused and tied better to the main plot, because the side plots just kind of lasted for a few pages then ended, lasted for a few pages then ended. Yes, and yes, I know that it's supposed to help her realize her self-worth in the end, but I still feel like it wasn't completely necessary. Besides that, though, the written quality was completely fantastic. The grammar was great, and most of the stories felt extremely smooth and just linear. Okay, now we're on to flaws. And usually, yeah, I just don't like spending too much time on flaws. But the one main one I felt like was that Melati's suffering was too common. I know that the point is to paint the Dian as this horrific creature and to make her feel like, you know, she has to overcome this threat. And I understand. But when a threat is way too often, too constant, and it loses its dramatic feel, there were too many times where the Dian could do whatever it wanted to. And every single time it felt like you really can't just top it anymore. There wasn't a climax where the Dian was its strongest. I could never really feel it that much if it's constantly at kind of a climax. So yeah, the negativity was too high in some places, in my opinion, that made it, you know, less impactful at the end. Now on to the final score. I think The Weight of Our Sky deserves a 17 out of 20. The reason for this is that there were a lot of great parts of the book, especially since it focuses on the Chinese Malay, you know, their anger towards each other, and the very symbolic name, The Weight of Our Sky, the fact that you have to hold up what remains of their life together as one and not keep separating and fighting. The Dian was a great addition, in my opinion. It was focused way too much on the negative on too many parts, but I feel like the idea of the Dian being kind of an antagonist in a way, tormenting Melati, was a unique touch to what otherwise was already a pretty good story. So yeah, I think 78 out of 20 is generally deserved, and I think it was a great book in general. So yeah, that was just generally my review of The Weight of Our Sky, how its positives, its, you know, less frequent negatives. And I'll just end off with, in my opinion, my favorite quote from the book. Have you heard this before? It means where we plant our feet is where we must hold up the sky. We live and die by the rules of the land we live in, but this country belongs to us. All of us. We make our own sky and we can hold it up together. It perfectly sums up the feeling of unity and the feeling of worth that is the central theme of this book. And yeah, that's it. That's all I like about it.